This week on Office Hours with Rich Fine, we have the honor of interviewing the director David Mendizábal, who is also one of the producing artistic directors of the Movement Theater Company based in New York City, which also happens to be an Obie Award-winning theater company. And we are going to talk particularly about where they see American theater headed. David has also had an impact on our central Northern California community because they recently directed at Berkeley Rep a play by the Pulitzer Prize winning Martina Mayock called Sanctuary City. So I'm so excited to talk to David about their perspective on theater, why they make theater, what they believe the power of theater is, and how can it help us to change society, and just on their process. So let's stay tuned and see what answers we
find. So I'm David Mendizábal. I'm the director of Sanctuary City by Martina Mayock. This is a play about two young people who are looking for sanctuary in each other and in a world that was not designed to see them thrive.
When the play starts, B is 16 years old and he's living in the Ironbound neighborhood in Newark, New Jersey, and he's living there undocumented with his mother. He came to this country with a visa, and ever since then he's overstayed his visa and just trying to navigate the world as an undocumented person.
G and also B are just two teenagers that are desperately just trying to be normal teenagers in the middle of, you know, their complicated situation and trying to find their way into normalcy.
One of the most beautiful moments in the play where we see them be teenagers, just be normal teenagers.
There's these really heavy topics, right? But I think the beautiful thing about Martina's writing, and something that she reminds us, is like, it's still a fun and sexy play, right? You know, like at the end of the day, it's not a didactic sort of like telling you what to think, but you're actually getting to experience these issues and the ways that they affect these two kids who are young and they're in high school and they've got all these hormones raging through their bodies and they're just trying to figure out who and what they want out of life.
One of them is very, very excited for prom, and the other one is just like, this is so lame, like everyone here is so lame, this is so cheesy. And so like really desperately trying to not get roped in to the like classic high school story, but then inevitably they get swept up by the music and just start dancing and realize that it is what they want.
We're so excited to see you at the Berkeley Rep to see Sanctuary City by Martina Mayock.
Yes, come out. Previews start July 8th. The show opens July 13th, and we close on August 14th. So please, please, please get your tickets. Come enjoy this show with us. Come for this ride, this beautiful, beautiful, so personal ride.
Hi, I'm Rich Fine. This is Office Hours with Rich Fine, and here I am with a very important guest. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Okay?
Hi, my name is David Mendizábal, and I am a director and a designer and a producer. I spent 20 years in New York City. I went to NYU undergrad for directing and sort of fell into costume design, and then worked professionally for 15 years in New York City, where I, along with a group of incredible artists out of NYU, helped to, I wasn't technically one of the co-founders, but I was there from the beginning. So helped to found, without being at the co-founder meeting, the Movement Theater Company, which we just celebrated our 15-year anniversary. And our mission is to develop and produce the work of artists of color, specifically fostering a brave space for Herculean ideas. So we're really big on creating work collaboratively that tackles social justice issues, and the kind of work that many artists have heard no from predominantly white institutions. Like, that's the work that we're looking for, you know? While I was in New York, I also helped to be one of the co-founders of the Soul Project, which is a national theater initiative. And its mission is to uplift the work of Latina playwrights on our major stages. So we work in partnership with New York and national theater companies to advocate for Latina writers to have full productions on their main stages. We advocate for directors of color, designers of color, and for that work to really not only happen once. You know, we consider ourselves seed planters. And so we are making connections with writers and artistic directors and hoping that that work continues to blossom. So our biggest production was a production of Oedipus El Rey by Luis Alfaro at the Public Theater. This year we have 2 shows going up, a play called Sancocho with WP Theater and a play called Bees and Honey by Guadalupe del Carmen with MCC Theater. So and we just won an Obie, and the Movement Theater Company won an Obie also.
Congratulations. That's enormous, right?
Thank
you. Did you dream when you started, right? When you first started in New York, or when you first started school at NYU, did you see this path for yourself?
Yes, but I like live in delusions of grandeur is like I actually call them visions of grandeur, because they're not delusions, but I really I think, you know, I mean, I think ever since I was like 12 years old and I watched like the Tony Awards for the first time, you know, and I think at this time it was like they were still doing like scenes from plays. And I vividly remember it was like Brian Stokes Mitchell, Viola Davis doing a scene from King Hedley II on the television. And I was hooked. I sort of immediately fell in love with theater. And you know, even in high school, in high school where we went.
By the way, I have to tell everybody, the way I know David is I met David when I was in 8th grade, and we went and we were doing it was like a photo performance at Disney World.
Yes.
We went to high school in Orlando, Florida. And so I was incoming to the Visual and Performing Arts Theater Magnet at Dr. Phillips High School in Orlando, Florida, across the street from Universal Studios. And I met David, and yeah, we had a wonderful time.
I was driving you. I remember that.
Yeah, it was like the family SUV, I think.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Crazy.
So wild. But yeah, but so even, you know, I think even when I was at school, you know, one of our very close friends who remains one of my best friends, an incredible producer and artist, Alex Meda, who runs Teatro Luna. You know, I remember we were kind of obsessed with like running the theater program, right? We like desperately wanted to be like officers. And so like from a young age, I was a producer. I was producing, right? And I never used that language. It actually took me a really long time to call myself a producer because I'm not good with money. And so I didn't think of like, and you think producer, money, but that's not always the case, right? It's like you are the person who is helping to make things happen, who is connecting people, who is planting seeds, who is advocating, who is creating a container for artists, yourself included, because I think producing is an art, to create collaboratively and work in a space that is brave and safe and pushes people, rigorous, right? Safely pushes people, right? Rigorous, but in order to make really incredible work. So I think ever since I was young, like I just knew what I wanted. You know, I will be shameless and say, like, I have a placeholder for my Tony Award. Like my dear best friend, a playwright, and I got us, mine is a D and his is an H for his name. And I bought them and I was like, these will hold our spot for when we get our Tonys, right? And so like, I think I've always had a clear vision, a clear path forward. And I will say at the same time, I have allowed myself to be surprised, you know? So strangely, I would say I never really thought I would be running a theater, right? Even though I was, and even though I wanted to, when the Movement Theater Company came about, it was really a phone call, and it was a group of friends, and they were like, hey, do you want to come like interview to be an artistic director? And I didn't really know what that meant, and we didn't really know what it meant. And I remember going to the interview and I cried. They were like, what, like, why do you do theater? And I like cried. And I was like, I love theater. It could change the world, right? And I still believe that. And then they were like, you got the job. And I was like, awesome. And I think, you know, we often say at the Movement, one of the original sins was forming a theater company. Like, I don't think anyone really wanted to. I think we just wanted to make work together. And at the same time, it's probably one of the best things that we did to build this artistic home for ourselves and also for this larger artistic community. And so one of the biggest takeaways in the first 5 years of the Movement Theater Company was recognizing, and I think this is what really set us apart, but was recognizing that the system, right? The way in which theaters were created, where you have like an artistic director, executive director, and this sort of top-down approach didn't really work with how we worked as an organization, right? We were a collaborative organization. We all had these like semi-asinine titles, you know, like aside from artistic director, which we knew what that was, but someone was like the managing director and like hated budgets, right? And so like we weren't really honoring our strengths and how we worked. And so through a program with the Alliance of Resident Theaters New York, which is an incredible arts service organization in New York, we were encouraged to sort of dismantle that traditional model for ourselves and to create a new one. And so in the first 5 years, we got rid of a hierarchical model for ourselves and we became the producing artistic leadership team. So there's 5 of us.
So there's no leader in your department. That's something, or in your company. That's something I noticed when I was doing a little bit of research on your career, is that I noticed that it didn't seem like there was, you know, a set hierarchy. I wasn't really sure what to call you, to be honest.
So there's 5 of us. Now there's 4 because Taylor Reynolds, who's an incredible director, has sort of stepped down from that role to focus on her burgeoning, exploding directing career. But so there's 4 of us and we all have the same title. So we all call ourselves the Producing Artistic Leadership Team. And a lot of that was to acknowledge that like we were all producers, we were all artists, we were all leaders, and we worked as a team. And like we really identified those 4 words and we were like, you know, language is powerful. We can call ourselves something and we can model that out in the field. And I think now it's really funny because now you're hearing a lot more, especially in the field, in leadership conversations around non-hierarchical leadership, right? And it's not to say that like we started that, because we didn't. It's been going on forever, right? But it was really a way in which we could create a literal movement inside of a company called The Movement that honored all that we were contributing, honored our strengths, and really put at the center of the organization a living value of collaboration, right? Like that is first and foremost, and that is how we've approached all of the work. We create it collaboratively, you know, and there is still, of course, leadership, right? So like Deidre Harrington, who is one of our producing artistic leaders, she really loves budgets, right? So it's like we don't all do exactly the same thing. You know, we sort of break it up and we have our strengths, but we also make sure that like the things that maybe we don't love, we're still engaged in, and that no one person holds any single position in the theater. And a lot of that is to, like, if you really think about it, especially now where there's a lot of leadership change, there are people who've been at institutions for 30 years who hold so much information, and when they go, it's like the theater potentially crumbles, right? And I think for us, it was like, how do we really acknowledge that like there is this ebb and flow, and we're all wanting to create something bigger than ourselves for people that is going to continually evolve as culture evolves, as processes evolves, as artists evolves, right? How do we really create a system and a model that allows us to be flexible and supportive and cater to each individual artist and their needs, and each individual project's needs, right? Without being like, this is the way we do things, and if you don't fit in here, you don't fit. And I think that's what I've seen in a lot of theaters. It's like, this is how a play is produced. This is how it's developed. There's no other way. And
I see this, what you're talking about right now is fascinating to me, because it's exactly the movement that's happening inside of education. And when I moved to California, my mind was blown, because, you know, I taught at some other places before, but Fresno City College, right, is a part of California Community Colleges. California has one of the best community college systems in the country. And our mission at Fresno City College is equity mindedness and anti-racism, not just fighting racism, but anti-racism. And so, you know, what I'm seeing is that we have tons of faculty, new faculty, go through something called the New Employee Equity Academy, right? Training that this is our mindset and that everything we do should be in line with really upending the model of higher education, right?
Yeah.
So what we find, it's just like how you're talking, someone at the head of a theater who's been there 30 years leaves, and, you know, the entire theater crumbles. We find with some of these faculty who leave, you know, the old way is leaving, but actually I think it's a real benefit, you know, in many ways, because it offers a new way of seeing, because these students who are coming in now, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, especially the ones who have sat on Zoom for 2 years of high school. Can you imagine if we had to do that our junior and senior year of high school? Would we have ever gotten into DePaul, where I went, or NYU, where you went, had we done that? So this model of creating a pathway to success for students is something I'm so passionate about. So I'm sure it's the same thing, creating a pathway for success for theater artists, young emerging artists, because that's the only way to honor anyone, is to tell their story, or just, I don't believe in theater just for entertainment. So I don't know. I don't think you do either. It doesn't seem like.
No, I mean, I think it can and should be certainly entertaining, right? But yeah, no. And I think what it does also is it acknowledges that like no two artists is the same, no two pathway is the same. And I think that was something that's been really helpful, especially in my directing career, right? Is like there's a scarcity mentality where like I'm watching other directors and I'm like trying to follow their path, but there is no one path, right? There is no one way of doing things in the world. And it is important to learn how things have been made, right? In order to be able to like break it, right? So like, it's like, I was going to make a cooking metaphor and I don't really cook, or like baking, right? But it's like, you have to learn how it's done, and then you can improvise, right? But like, if you don't know what the foundational tools are, then you're like, I don't even know where to start. So it's like, what is the foundation, but also how do I adapt it? And how do I remain flexible to acknowledge that this process or this artist is going to be different? And I think that makes space for more equity, diversity, inclusion. That acknowledges the wholeness of individuals and their individual needs and processes, right? And so I think that's really thrilling and exciting, and also a little scary to see like there's such an evolution and change. But I really look to the younger generations who are actively interrogating the why, like, why has it always been done this way, right? And is there another way of doing things? And I think that's quite thrilling.
Every piece of the system, from my understanding and my belief, and just some of the things I've been through personally, right, radically shifted the way that I thought. I thank God for it every day, the things that have happened in my life, because you know, I was able to see my entitlement. And when you're able to look at that in the mirror, you begin to realize that we're not the center of the universe, and other people who are not typically at the table deserve a seat at the table, right? So,
yeah, absolutely. And it makes, I don't know, for me, it makes for more interesting art making, you know, the more meeting of the minds that there are, you know, and it's not just about having that seat at the table either. It's about having that equal voice in the game, right? And being, and again, wholeness, which I think to me is like such an important value. And I will say, like, as a queer person of, you know, Puerto Rican Ecuadorian background, who is first generation, and so many other social locators, right? The theater has been one of the few places that has been able to hold the expansiveness of my identity in a way that, if it is able to do that for everyone, and I believe it is. I believe it can. I believe the theater can and should hold the wholeness of all of us, right? We just have to, like, keep pushing towards that and seeing more of the voices and visions and faces of stories that maybe we haven't come in contact with, right? And that was really why I've done theater, and I continue to do theater. That's been always my mission, and it's a lived value of how do we have access to worlds that maybe we don't have access to in our everyday lives, and how do we use the tool of theater to build understanding and empathy in a way that allows us to expand our own humanity, because we're able to go into these worlds that maybe we don't have access to, right? And that's not possible if we're not seeing and putting it on our stages. And so, you know, with the Movement Theater Company, where we were doing it, you know, one of our biggest productions was Alicia Harris's play, What to Send Up When It Goes Down, that Whitney White directed, that was an incredible ritualistic piece of theater that tackled anti-Blackness in this country in a way that I had not ever seen, and really centered Black audiences and healing. And I think that was a really incredible moment for me to recognize, you know, as a non-Black person of color, you know, how do I leverage resources that I have to create a space and step back, right? Because it's not about me, and I'm not at the center, right? How do I sort of give space to that, learn? And it was one of the most powerful pieces, you know, that we produced at the Movement Theater Company, and then at Soul Project, you know, advocating for these Latina voices. And, you know, 15 years of doing this professionally in New York City, and building a community, and beginning to see that sea of change, right? And see these artists that I went to school with, or I grew up with, and sort of had in my home, and we shared our same concerns, finally being given the opportunity to shine and to use their voice, and not just as a puppet for someone else's story, but with agency of their own story, right? And
when you say puppet, you mean like playing the maid, or
right,
playing the gardener,
right?
Or,
like, here we are, we need this, or like, oh, we need to just like add a person of color in here, but they don't have an arc, and it's not their story, and they are a character in someone else's story instead of the lead in their own, right? And I think a lot of that is like the work that's being produced, right? And shifting more towards writers of color being able to tell their own stories. So yes, yeah, all of that. And, you know, currently, so I spent 20 years in New York City, and I just recently moved to California, to Berkeley, in June of 2022, I was at Berkeley Repertory Theater in Berkeley, California. I directed the West Coast premiere of Martina Mayock's play Sanctuary City.
Have you met her? Do you know her?
Yes, I do know Martina. Yes, yes.
Maybe you can ask her to come talk to me.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
If you're willing.
Yeah, absolutely. She's incredible. You know, I became familiar with the play when it was looking for a production in New York pre-pandemic, right? And I knew that New York Theater Workshop, who did the world premiere of it, was producing it. And I campaigned as if I was campaigning for president.
I have a campaign going on too. So I think I know who put that in us. We know a lady named Karen.
Yes.
She's a campaigner.
Yes. And, you know, and it's like, you have to advocate for yourself. That was something. And I did, I advocated for myself. I reached out to Martina, I reached out to the producers. I had my agent, you know, and while it didn't work out for there, I think that energy of putting that out, of asking the universe for what I wanted, sort of came back around. And Joanna Felser, who is the now artistic director of Berkeley Rep, we actually were in New York at the same time watching the New York Theater Workshop production of Sanctuary City after, I guess, when theater came back post the height of the pandemic. And she was like, do you want to direct this play? And I was like, I have been waiting for someone to ask me this. So I went to Berkeley and I directed the play. And then it transferred to the Arena in DC. So my production went from Berkeley to DC. And while I was in Berkeley, I sort of fell in love. And Joanna Felser was hiring an associate. And so I threw my hat in the ring. And as of December, I am the new associate artistic director at Berkeley Repertory Theater. So
can I just tell you, out of I've lived a lot of cities. You stayed in New York, I lived a lot of places, and probably one of my favorite places on the planet is Berkeley.
It's beautiful.
I love UC Berkeley. I recently got to tour. If you haven't ever checked out their costume storage at UC Berkeley's Performance Studies, their costume storage is unreal. I mean, absolutely unreal. Wendy Sparks and Jane Bogus there were so kind to me and showed me around. And yeah, I love Berkeley. So you were just so lucky.
It's a beautiful, and I think part of what I was excited about at Berkeley Rep is, it is an institution that has historically, from its founding, been about community and been about work that tackles social justice. Berkeley was the first sanctuary city in the United States. And so to be able to do Sanctuary City in the first sanctuary city was really incredible, at a theater that those values exist at its core. For a long time, its community was was predominantly white, right? And I think under the new leadership, what Joanna has really been passionate about is how are we really expanding the idea of who our community is. And I think there's a lot of audience development. We have a brown show, we need brown people, right? And I think what is exciting to me is that the conversation is less about audience development here. It's less about how do we get butts in seats, and it's more about how are we really utilizing the resources that we have to engage with our community, give back to our community, build these meaningful relationships that are non-transactional. And so through an initiative there that I spearhead with our associate managing director. When
you say non-transactional relationships, what do you mean specifically by that?
Yeah, I mean, I think oftentimes, it's February, we're doing the Black play, right? Because Black History Month. And so it's we need Black audiences. So let's, in January 15th, go to the Black church and be here's some free tickets. And that's it. And then we're never going to speak to you again until next February, right? That to me is very transactional. It's I need something from you. I really just want you to come. Boom, check the box. But there's no real relationship there, right? There's no real I've not gotten to know you. I don't know what it is that you want, and so.
But isn't one of the challenges at regional theater that the model, like the economic model or the financial model for regional theater is season ticket holders, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So one of the things that I would think would be a challenge, I don't know, I'd love your opinion, is that, you know, if you're trying to increase minority audiences, right? They typically in America, sadly, don't have the same economic resources as, you know, as non-minority audiences. So how do we bring them in a way that gives them ownership of the theater in the way that subscribers had ownership, you know, 20 years ago or today even?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is like, how do we make people feel welcome in our spaces that have historically denied access to them? You know, I think it begins with seeing their stories reflected on stage, right? But I think it's also about, and this is where I think it's, you know, I think oftentimes, you know, we sit pretty high in our little theaters at the top of the hill, right? And we're like, come up, come up, come up. And we never go out. We never go down. We never go, you know. And so I think for us and for the initiative In Dialogue that I'm working at with our associate managing director, you know, it's really about going out into the community, right? It's about going out to meet people where they are, to talk to them. What are the stories that you want to, you know, I think oftentimes we're like, you know what they need? Shakespeare. And it's like, nobody needs Shakespeare. And so I said it.
Nobody needs Shakespeare. Hey, I just interviewed somebody who would fight you on that, and you can go meet her at Marin Shakespeare Company, Leslie Currier, the managing director, who has affected change in the state of California by closing over 5 state prisons with her program of producing Shakespeare in prisons.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm supposed to be going into San Quentin to help do costumes for Taming of the Shrew in May. So amazing. I'm really excited about that. So sometimes Shakespeare.
Sometimes people do need Shakespeare. Okay, yes. But I think, you know, but in what I was trying to say is like, I think that it's like, sometimes, not always, sometimes those ideas are decided in a room full of sort of people who have never spoken to anyone outside of that circle, right? And we're like, you know what they need, without asking. And so I think for me, it's really about like building those relationships, going and talking to people, being like, what are you working on? What are you looking for? What do you need? How might the resources that we have, because I think, and you know, we went to a performing arts theater magnet program, and maybe a handful of the people that we went to school with are still, actually doing theater, right? And all of those people who were at school with us who are not doing theater, I think that they would all agree the tools of theater, the fundamental tools of theater, the way in which it allows for empathy, for socializing, for making change, for telling stories, for using your voice, right? There's such invaluable tools that whether or not you're making theater or not, they are useful in movement building, they're useful in community building, they're useful in empowerment, right? And so I think in a lot of ways, that's where, like, and that's where you see it's like, are all these people going to turn into actors? No. Are some of them? Maybe.
Do we want them to? Not necessarily, but do we want them to have ownership in their communities and build communities? That's
and do we
want an educational theater.
Absolutely. Yes. And we want them to be able to be like, you know, I mean, I think about it from like the beginning of from the beginning of time, you know, light a fire, gather around and tell stories, right?
It's so crazy that you say that, because when I start costume design, my costume design class, my first lecture is I always like to say that the oldest part of theater is actually the costume, that the costume came before anything else. So I tell a story of a long time ago. You know, that's I love that you said that. That's
fun. But it's true. It's like, you know, we've been telling stories. I think it's a human need. I think it's essential, like breathing, to tell your story, to know that like when we're not here, like we will have, our stories will be remembered, right? And and I think the tools of theater give people an opportunity to feel that, to do that, and that is change, and that's what's necessary. And if that comes from Shakespeare, awesome, but it can also come from other things, you know, and other artists and other voices, and people telling their own stories too. So I think that, you know, when I talk about like relational ways of moving, that's the real way, where it's not just transactional, we see each other once a year, you know, but it's really like we're deepening, we're getting to know each other, we're creating space for agency and wholeness, you know. And it's the long game, you know. It's the same way if you think about the subscribers and the subscription program, those audiences have been they have a relationship to the theater, right? If you ask people why they go, it's like, for many, it's like, oh, I came here with my family and this was a tradition. And there's something that is a nostalgia or a feeling or a home, a community, right? And it's like, I think that's possible for everyone if we just create that access, right? So that's
Absolutely.
really been my life's work in a lot of ways.
Well, I'll just tell you, I would hire you if I was at Berkeley by everything you've said recently. I mean, it's miraculous. Can I ask you a couple questions about Sanctuary?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I haven't read the full text and I didn't get to see your production, and I've never seen the production. But I was able to read the beginning of the text. And what blew my mind was the quick, fast dialogue that was really, really short phrases, right? And it seemed to change day to day.
Yeah.
I also noticed an element of abuse. There's an abusive nature. There's like a tale of trauma going on, right? And I think in order to have communications with almost anybody today, we have to acknowledge that everybody has some kind of trauma.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me a little bit about, and these are young people too, right? So my career, I focus on young people primarily, right? And so many of them are dealing with so much trauma that sometimes they don't even know how to interact in the world anymore. And they look to us, you know, to find ways to interact and have a meaningful communication. So can you talk a little bit about what your approach was like as a director in those first scenes?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it is it's such a deeply, deeply, deeply personal play for me. It hits home. My father is an immigrant from Ecuador, and he was naturalized. You know, the American dream. Came to this country, was a New York City cab driver, found his way into Harvard Law School, started his own immigration law firm, and is doing immigration law in Orlando, Florida, where it is very necessary, right? And when I was young, I would go with him to his office over the summer, and I would get to go to the courtyard, to the courthouse, and I would watch him, in my eyes, perform, right? Do monologues, and so much of it was advocating for the health, safety, equality, and equity of immigrant people, right? And the power of their story being told, right? The characters in the play also happen to be my age. Exactly. In the play, they were my age when it takes place. So the play takes place between 2003 and 2008. So it is 2 years after 9/11. They go to prom in 2003, which is the year that I went to prom. And it is a friendship between an unnamed boy and an unnamed girl.
It's G and B for boy and girl.
Yeah, they're unnamed. You know, they are both immigrants to this country. They came when they were very young. They were brought here by the parents, and for all, you know, for all they know, they are American, right? Like they have American tongues. They were not born here, but this is all they know, right? And as you said, the girl is in an abusive home. She sort of sneaks into her friend's bedroom window one night, and that's what starts the play. Is he lets her in, and they start this friendship relationship, where they are each other's saviors and protectors, and the structure of the first part of the play is these vignettes, right? So it's flashing back and forth in time. It's incredibly repetitive and cyclical.
Seems like it would be difficult to direct too. It doesn't seem like it would be very easy to direct.
It's not an easy play. It's a very hard play, right? Because you're constantly toggling time, space, emotional space, and and it moves at a quick pace.
Yeah.
So I had two really incredible actors, and three actually. It's a three-hander, but the first part of the play, there's only two, and then there's a twist that happens in the second half where it turns into one long scene, and there's a third character that's introduced. And for me, I think speaking about this notion of trauma, I approached the play from the corporeal sense, right? I think trying to intellectualize it, you'll go crazy, right? Like trying to just keep it all in your head. It's like, where are we? What's going on? Huh? What? Right? It starts to get a little loopy. And so, the phrase I kept telling my actors was like watercolors. We're painting with watercolors. We're gonna just lay down different watercolors as we approach and sort of sketch it out. And if we started to obsess about a scene for too long, we'd move on. Right. And in the corporeal sense, it was, where does this live? Right. Where are these characters are a phrase that we also used a lot with the designers was this notion of hiding in plain sight. Right. These are two kids who have to go to school, who are out in the world, working in school, living their lives, and they have essentially an invisible target on their back. At any moment, there's this fear that their whole world could come crushing down on them, either with their families or themselves, And this is also post 9/11, right, where there was an incredible sort of xenophobia that was created, an anti-immigrant mentality because of the horrific events that happened in this country, and a lot of hate that was sort of formed. And so, that added fear of any.
Do you remember that day in high school?
It's like crystal clear.
I was a freshman that day in high school.
Clear.
Do you remember? Do you remember going out to the football field?
Yeah, I was in the theater when it started. I remember someone walking in, whispering to Karen what happened. None of us knew because we didn't have a television or the announcements in the theater. And then we walked out, the bell rang, we walked out and we walked around and everyone looked shell-shocked. And I remember walking into Miss Robitaille, our anatomy and physiology teacher's class, where we had a test that day. Walking in, the television was on, we sat down, our tests were on our table.
Because it's Miss Robitaille.
Miss Robitaille. Right. And she was like, that is the Pentagon and it is on fire. And we were like, and she was like, we're going to take our tests. And it was like, if you can, do it. If you can't, don't. But it was actually a really lovely,
life goes on kind of a moment.
Distract yourself too. If this is not it was an option. It was I actually found it very caring. It sounds kind of horrific. She made you take a test, but I thought it was a very caring thing. It was we're not going to turn this off. We're not going to deny that this is happening. But for some people, this is hitting very close to home. And so, we're going to hold space for all of it. And so it was a distractor. And then, I remember the evacuation and having to go outside, and it was wild. It was a hard, horrible time, right? This horrible chapter. And so, when you're putting it in the context of this play, this added pressure cooker that these youths are, any corner they turn, their life could upend. And so for me, it was where does that live? And for the actors, it was where do we find that in the body, right? It's a hard play to learn because it's repetitive, it's cyclical, right? So each scene is like a line, and then it repeats itself with a slight variation, and then it repeats itself with a slight variation.
Right.
And you start to go, nuts, going like, wait, didn't I do this already? Or like,
you know what is funny? When I read it, I was like, oh my God, if it was badly directed, it would be like the play that goes wrong,
Yes. And it's like, and so for us, that was a lot. It was like, okay, how can we, instead of trying to keep this all in your head, it's like, how do you find it in your body? And there became a kind of choreographic nature to the direction, right? The whole first part took place in this little square box. There was no scenery, but it was very much like, I would just be sitting there in rehearsal clapping. I'd be like, scene change, scene change, scene change. And they would have to identify where, are they open? Are they closed? Are they hiding here? What are they hiding? What are they, and it became almost like finding in the body the narrative, which then allowed the words to stick, right? And so it was honestly, one of my favorite rehearsal processes ever. I had this incredible cast. We were able to really speak firsthand account of our experiences as people of color. For some of us were first generation or had parents who were immigrants. Folks who were dealing with the immigration system, right? And it's such a convoluted system. It's sort of purposefully hard to navigate, right? And so we had partnered in dialogue with the East Bay Sanctuary Covenant, and we're able to have access to folks there to get some dramaturgical information, and also support them in our lobby display where folks who were supported by their initiative, immigrants, were able to have their stories displayed and their artwork displayed in our lobby. So it was real sort of a larger conversation happening. And I think was, like for me, such a moment of like living values being placed center in the work, right? And being able to do a play that was just so personal and in line with my values, and at a theater that made space for that was very special.
Okay, I'm going to tell you a quick little anecdote, and then we're going to wrap it up. I could listen to you talk forever, David. I mean, I'm blown away. You really know this craft. I'm going to tell you an anecdote about a student I have, and I'm not going to name them. We'll call this student Joe, right? And, or Joey maybe. So in my classes, I teach face-to-face, but I also teach online using Canvas. I don't know if you know what Canvas is, but it's like an online system for running classes, right? And a lot of times I will post things online. So I do like hybrid classes so they can follow along online, and then they can also participate in class. It's kind of like where you can store homework and things. And I have discussion boards, right? And students have become very accustomed to doing discussion boards during the pandemic, right? And anyway, well, you have to have a computer or a phone at least to post a discussion, right? Because usually the assignment is post a reply to this prompt and then reply to a few of your peers, right? And that will count for 10 points or whatever. And this was about a week into starting this term in January. And I had a student come up to me, Joey, and he handed me a sheet of paper just like this, right? And it had his name on it. And it had, and the prompt was, tell me a little bit about yourself. It was like an introduction icebreaker, tell me a little bit about yourself, your goals, your objectives, why you're in school. And it had his name on it, and it responded. He had at the top of it, discussion post written on this piece of paper. And it said who he was a little bit, and then it had 2 replies to peers post, and he turned it in on a sheet of paper. And he said, I don't have a computer or a phone, but could I get credit for this? And I said, of course, absolutely. You know, that's not a problem at all. Maybe I can help you get a computer. Well, he had waited too late. And we have 27,000 students at Fresno City College. So we have computers that we give out to students, but if you don't go early, then you won't get one because we run out, right? And so I tried to help get the student some technology, and that didn't work out. But I read this sheet of paper, and I asked something like, what are you most proud of? And the student not only wrote that he was a first-generation college student, but that he was a first-generation American and a first-generation high school graduate.
Amazing.
And he doesn't have technology. And so for me, who got to go to, you know, the largest Catholic institution in America, who has a private nonprofit undergraduate degree and a private bougie Tribeca graduate degree, to see this, you know, it makes me double down that, you know, this is God's will for my life, right? And anything I can do to offer a pathway for that student forward, maybe not in theater, but just in life, is remarkable. So my final question to you is, what would you say to first-generation college students, first-generation Americans who are maybe first-time college students who are thinking about a career in theater? What would you say to them?
Oof, that's a big one. I think first and foremost, I would say, like, congratulations. Like look around, look at where you've gotten, look at what you have done for yourself, right? I don't think a lot of times we take the time to acknowledge the blessings, right? So I think first and foremost is like acknowledge that blessing, right? Secondly, I would say this field needs you. This field will soon become irrelevant without you. It may not feel like there is a path forward, but I believe that the theater belongs to everyone, and that the theater does not only exist inside of a bougie white institution. I believe that everyone has the tools and the power to be making theater, to be bringing theater to their communities. I would say, like my path, finding those peers who challenge you, who believe in you, who you believe in, who you are inspired by, and sticking with them, right? Building community is huge. You know, like, I am where I am because of some of the most incredible artists that I have been blessed to learn from. And many of them are younger than me, right? Like, I think there's this idea that like mentorship is like, you got to find some like old person to like mentor you. And I'm like, I'm such an advocate of peer-to-peer mentorship and acknowledging that like, I am where I am because of the people I had around me who challenged me, who called my ass out, who put me in my place in the most loving, gentle way, who saw something in me and said, like, I see something in you and I want something more for you. And how are you opening yourself up to be more vulnerable, to be more of that leader that I know that you are, right? And I would say that to all of you is like, you are a leader, right? And there are so many systems and there are so many people in this world who are going to make you feel less than, to put you down, to remind you that this doesn't belong to you. And that is not true. That is not true at all.
Thank you so much, David. Wow. So I cut you off, but that's the perfect place.
No, yeah.
It's not true. It's not true.